Hello, and welcome to the Harley Street Health District podcast. I'm Professor Jenny Shand, and I'm your host. In this mini-series, we are speaking to leaders building health and innovation districts across the world, from Boston to Barcelona. Today, we're going to hear more about the Texas Medical Center, and I'm here with Homer Quintana, the director for the Center for Rapid Device Translation at Houston Methodist, which is within the Texas Medical Center.
Jenny, it's a great pleasure to be on this podcast. My role at Houston Methodist is actually very exciting. I get to work with innovative technologies and help those technologies advance into a clinical setting by validating the research and development of that technology within preclinical and clinical models. And the goal is always patient-focused. We have the patient at the heart of everything that we do.
Which is so important to have the patient at the center of it. Tell us a bit more about the collection of organizations that you sit within in the Texas Medical Center.
Absolutely. So the Texas Medical Center is about 3 square miles that is a nonprofit zone. There are multiple institutions, and if you take count, there's roughly 60 plus institutions within the TMC, as we call it here. And each of these institutions exist in a nonprofit status within this zone. We have everything from hospitals to academic institutes of higher learning, with a goal to focus on healthcare. It's all within a confined space. And in that confined space, you have 120,000 healthcare providers. We have well over the capability of almost 200,000 patients at any point in time. And it really is a small city, and it's something that you have to see in person. I invite anyone that's watching this podcast to come and visit us and experience it for yourselves. But it's changed. It's existed since the 1940s, when the Texas Medical Center was established by a land grant provided by the city of Houston and a gentleman's foundation by the name of Monroe D. Anderson, now known as MD Anderson, which is a very well-renowned cancer center in the United States. But they allotted 134 acres to create a dedicated space for healthcare and the improvement of healthcare and innovation in the healthcare setting.
Yeah, thank you, Homer. And tell us a bit more about the different organizations that are there. Is it very deliberately curated? Have you got new partners coming on board, or is it quite a stable ecosystem?
It's a relatively stable ecosystem. The dynamics that are changing within the ecosystem really focus on the innovation component. There is tremendous growth happening in allowing for startups to develop in these institutions and spin out, to have an ecosystem to support startups and industry partners from other parts of the world, and really to have the eyes of venture and industry partners who are going to take these technologies and commercialize, or at least get the rollout of these technologies in a sales and training manner out. And so you put it all together, it is an ecosystem that is very much changing every day. And there are quite a few eyes all over the world on what we're doing here because of the unique nature of what we have within this ecosystem, namely access to specialty and a diversity of patient populations that are not seen in too many places around the world.
Thinking about, as an innovator, if you've got a relatively new idea, it can be quite daunting connecting with some of these very established, excellent providers. And MD Anderson, I think, is the building just behind you. Keen to hear a bit more about how do you help build that bridge between those two organizations, or those two sort of ecosystems of innovators, startups, people with great ideas.
Absolutely. So we benefit from living in an ecosystem that is based upon innovation in the medical device space. So in my world, I have access to clinical scientists, researchers that want to see a medical device technology or medical technology in general. If you have a technology that is reaching a patient population with a dire need, and there is interest here at Houston Methodist by some clinical champion, we work towards building that collaboration to get that technology from where it is to the next gate or milestone that it needs to reach. And as many of you know, innovation is a marathon. It is not a sprint. So you have to work towards those gates. All that we do here is we de-risk and find approaches to reach that gate more efficiently.
Yeah, and the role of clinical champions and key opinion leaders is absolutely vital in scaling innovation. Can you say a little bit more about how people get connected?
Absolutely. There are multiple ways that people engage in innovation, and you have to remember that people have different appetites for the type of innovation they want to engage in. Some are very much hands-on on the early development of a technology. Some of them just want to see the technology reach a patient population so that they can run a clinical trial, collect the data, analyze the data, and then publish, present at relevant conference or symposia. So it's really important to understand where in that design that particular innovator or that particular clinical champion wants to exist. But more importantly, there are multiple events being held throughout the Texas Medical Center, both at the institutional level and as an ecosystem approach to allow for these innovation collisions to happen. There are everything from networking events, we have grand rounds presentations, we have deliberately designed spaces where you have to run into people and you have to talk to them, which is a great thing to have. Many of the innovation collisions that I have actually happen as I'm making my way from one part of the hospital to the other. I run into someone, hey, have you heard of such and such technology? Actually, I haven't. Why don't you have a coffee with me and let's talk about it? And by the time we're done with that conversation, we're approaching maybe working with a technology, piloting that technology in the next 6 to 12 months.
I love that term of innovation collisions. We talk quite a bit about engineered serendipity, of being like, actually, those chance encounters are a lot more deliberate than we might think they are. And you've described the sort of ecosystem of people around the Texas Medical Center and how you're all aligned around a common ambition, around improving patient outcomes. And it's bringing those sort of communities together that we've certainly seen can be really beneficial, as you've described. One thing I'm really struck on is, so in Harley Street Health District, we've got very existing providers. We've got a diverse set of specialisms that are provided. I'm aware that over time, academic medical centres have been very concentrated with specific clinical focuses, and you've mentioned MD Anderson and cancer, for example. How important do you think it is for a district to be very explicit about those specialisms or areas that they focus in? And how do you stop that forcing us into silos and keeping the recognition that there's a real breadth of healthcare out there that we can innovate for?
Oh, absolutely. It is important to set the table. I can't emphasize that enough. You have to understand the playground in which you're going to be working, playing in, because if you don't understand how things happen within a certain space, the results that you're going to get from your experience are probably not going to be what you expect or positive in nature. And so for us, we benefit as a hospital system here at Houston Methodist from being focused on all adult specialties. We don't focus on pediatrics because right next door to us is the largest pediatric system in the United States and Texas Children's. We don't focus on other components because it exists within the parameters that we have here in the Texas Medical Center, but it also allows for a collaborative nature to exist between these institutions. At the end of the day, if you don't understand your capabilities and the strategic vision of where you want to drive in your innovation focus, you're going to come into some weird impasse where you can't move forward.
Do you have a very established path for how you select an innovation you want to partner with, how you test it, how you evaluate it to see whether it's something you want to sustain and scale?
Absolutely. The first door or gate that you have to face is me, and my approach is really vetting the viability of the company, because we want to ensure that these companies have a few things in place to allow them to work with an institution that has been around now for 107 years in Houston Methodist. You can imagine this institution is well established. We are very selective of the approach that we take with those outside of our own sphere. And we need to understand the viability of the company. We need to understand what that company is going to do in terms of regulatory strategy. And my advice is always, yes, find a consultant, but more importantly, talk to the FDA as soon and as often as possible. What they want to see is a tolerable profile for risk management that is acceptable by them. And so I always tell any company that I'm working with, as I meet with them for the very first 30 minutes, and that's usually how it works. You have 30 minutes for you and I to meet. I'm going to learn about where you are, what you need, what resources you have, what resources you're lacking. And if there is a possibility to work with someone here at Houston Methodist, I will go and identify particular individuals, and then you have to convince them. So we look at IP, we look at the viability of the company in terms of financial runway. We also look at regulatory strategy and having that in place. If you have that, and we also do some due diligence on the science behind the technology, then we go and identify someone within that specialty, and the company has 30 minutes to address that individual and talk about the potential for this technology to impact their world. If someone sees an interest in that, we get a confidentiality agreement in place, and then we start looking under the hood as to what do we need to do next. We're talking about study designs. If we need to do animal or human trials, we can then build budgets. We can tell you what it's going to cost. We can tell you how we're going to do this in terms of timelines. And then you, as a company, now have something incredibly valuable. You have an understanding of what a major American healthcare system and research institution is willing to undertake once you secure the funding or you have the time and contract to conduct this study. So it's tremendously valuable for the companies, because once they really understand what that pivotal clinical trial, what that GLP study or summative human factor study is going to cost them and how quickly they can execute it, that is gold.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. It sounds like a really established path that you've got in place, and certainly making sure that there's a need or a gap that's being filled by this technology is absolutely critical. But the evolving landscape of the regulators is really important, because in this tech-enabled services that's moving at pace with agentic AI, I think the rules are being changed as we go, and rightly so as we learn more and more. So it's great to hear sort of more about how you look at that. Do your innovators often co-locate with you? Do they then come and take space in the Texas Medical Center, or is that less important? Is it more just about those on-the-ground collaborations on doing the testing of their specific solutions?
Well, it depends on the vision behind the companies that are engaging with us. But the reality is we have space available for co-location within the Texas Medical Center through different incubators or just space that one could acquire. And that was part of the vision that was built around innovation for the Texas Medical Center in general, to allow for the creation of accelerators, incubator space, whether you're in a dry or a wet lab space, and then allow for you to be able to grow. So you may have a desk with a fume hood capability for you and your partner as you're launching your venture. And as the team expands, we can then look for a space that's going to be maybe 14,000 square feet that will allow you to produce, manufacture, and do some other things within the space. These companies find that once they enter an ecosystem that has not one, not two, but multiple institutions that are treating patients and have KOLs and expertise in that specialty, they realize that I can knock on multiple doors and I can build collaborative engagements across these institutions who already work with one another in some form or fashion. It just becomes so much easier to do the things that you need to do to build the relationships and the pathway of development for your technology.
Yeah, and it's definitely a relational business, isn't it? And as you said, with those innovation collisions, it's the conversations that you have that help get these solutions out there. And I think we've seen that in Harley Street Health District. We've got, a collection of, I guess, competitors, a group of providers that are having overlapping services. But as you say, there is always underpinning that an element of collaboration. So we're really excited about creating spaces for health tech and innovators to come and sort of be present and test and scale their solutions. So it sounds like there's some similarities on that, which is really exciting to hear. What do you think is really key about helping these things scale? So we've heard from others about, failing fast, being really clear on how you evaluate an innovator, how you look at it in those early testing rounds. But what do you think really is critical about helping something scale once you've realized, yes, this works, it's having a proven benefit for the system, for patients, for how we work? What happens next?
Well, the wonderful thing of failing fast and failing often and then coming from that and securing success is at some point you have to scale. And although we here at Houston Methodist exist as a hub and spoke system, the main campus, which is where I work out of, is the Texas Medical Center campus. There are 9 hospitals in the Houston Methodist community. Within those 9 hospitals, I'm able to transfer my technology, my approach, into different types of hospital systems. You get to see a profile of what that technology is going to do within different approaches, And the reality is, when I'm working with these companies, we're not just deploying technologies to see if they will work in terms of safety and efficacy. We're looking at training, we're looking at education, we're looking at a rollout of an approach. Because guess what? If you invent something that's going to benefit a patient, but you don't have the proper educational curriculum to train those that are going to be deploying or using these technologies on a day-to-day basis, it becomes very difficult for adoption. So you have to take that into consideration. We have an entire floor that's dedicated to education and training. And so we can train at large scale. So we have our Center for Innovation, which can very quickly pivot from we're doing R&D to no, now we're going to be scaling up and moving across the diverse hospital systems where we have 9 hospitals in place, right? And at the end of the day, that benefits all of the patients. You're collecting data from diverse patient populations across the city of Houston, which is approaching about 7 million people within the greater Houston area.
Yeah. And how does your not-for-profit status influence that? I mean, we have a bit of a tension in the UK where we have a private system and a public system, and diversity is absolutely critical, and inequalities in access to and in outcomes from treatment is very much at the heart of our government's agenda of improving health outcomes. But often you find that the cohorts accessing private care aren't always diverse. What we're learning is that the role of research and actually increasing participation in research and privately funded activities can help get more diverse patients through private pathways. But keen to hear a bit more about how do you ensure that diversity of access?
Well, we benefit from having existed within the Houston area for 100 plus years. And we have trust from the Houston population across the hospitals that are purposely built within different communities. And so that access to those patients from longitudinal relationships, generation after generation after generation, and the reality where many people within Houston, their primary care provider is someone affiliated with Houston Methodist, right? I see the diversity in my colleagues. It is well represented in this city.
That's brilliant. And obviously that helps with the scaling strategy as well, because you can show that there are lots of different populations that these solutions work for. One piece I wanted to think about was about some of the deliberate decisions that have been made by the district. If we think back to this sort of long history, are there things that were tried and didn't work that you sort of scaled back from? How have you learned from failures, I guess, as well as some of these successes?
Sure, absolutely. In the past, the Texas Medical Center would generate technologies, but those technologies would always go to the coasts. Unfortunately, it would leave us in a position where something that was invented here didn't really benefit the patients that it was intended to until it was fully commercialized, and you couldn't control the entirety of that process. That's not a failure, that's an opportunity to learn. And the Texas Medical Center said, no, why don't we establish an ecosystem? And by doing that, you just naturally attract other funders. And we also benefit from living in Texas. If you don't know Texas, my recommendation is to visit us in March when we have our rodeo. You'll see Texas as you imagine it, boots and cowboy hats. But Texas is very much an individual maverick. We're very proud of who we are. At the state level, we're also aware of how special the Texas Medical Center is. And so it's an amazing space to live in. We are not ever lacking in opportunity. It's just ensuring that it's an opportunity that's going to be targeted in a way where it has a chance. And that just speaks to maturation.
And that's interesting, him, and it does sound like it's been evolving and maturing over time. And certainly we are seeing the role of investors as being a sort of key catalyst of being able to accelerate some of these innovations and health tech solutions as a really important part of some of these different districts that we're looking at. So for a long time, there's been research, there's been providers, there's been patients, and over time, there seems to be more and more innovation and technology, but also investment. So it's great to hear about the impact that's had for you and for Texas Medical Center as well. Seems to be, a cool part of it. I wanted to think a little bit more about international collaborations. So we've talked a bit about Texas and about scaling across the US. How have some of your solutions scaled internationally, and what sort of partnerships have you built to support that?
Oh, absolutely. So the Texas Medical Center has built a series of biobridges with countries all over the world. We have biobridges with Denmark, the Netherlands, the UK, Japan, Korea, Australia, Ireland. And those biobridges create that access that these companies from other parts of the world direly need. Again, I mentioned just alone in Houston, the patient population or the access to large patient populations that you just can't imagine in countries that don't have either that diversity in patients or the volumes. It's created the capability for companies that think they have a solution that's ready for the American market to knock on someone's door here in Houston and realize that there may be some modifications that they need to make to that technology before they go and make their way into the market to the effect where they're actually going to be impactful and well received. And that is a huge accolade to the Texas Medical Center to have been able to build an ecosystem where, again, you're not knocking on one institution, you're knocking on multiple institution doors and getting answers and perspective.
And how do you make sure that people know what you need? So how do you get that comms out earlier than those solutions coming to you so that people are solving problems that are real and that you are invested in, rather than people just coming to pitch lots of different ideas?
Absolutely. So I have the good fortune of having great relationships with the people that are working in clinics, in ORs, in patient care, with our researchers here. And there's a constant dialogue. I'm looking for a solution to this. Well, great. I get to add it to a list. And it's wonderful. I'll run into someone and, hey, what are you working on today? "Oh, I'm trying to do XYZ. Well, there's a company that is actually from, and I'll name the country, that is in that exact field that I think could help you. And before you know it, that turns into a meeting and possibly a relationship in terms of collaboration in the future. But these people come to me on a day-to-day basis with their problems. My world is very similar to VC in that it's all about deal flow. I have probably met with, I want to say conservatively, probably 4,000 to 5,000 companies in the 8 years that I've managed and directed the Center for Rapid Device Translation. I've worked with 55. That's a very, very small number. But of those 55 companies that I've worked with, 2/3 of them have been able to do something with us that has advanced their technology to the next gate that is going to allow them to reach the next level of funding. And if you put all of that funding that they've reached cumulatively, it's greater than $500 million. I want to say it's like 530 million, 540 million. And that's wonderful because these companies get to continue their endeavors with data that's been validated with a collaboration with a tremendous institution that has a goal of not just running an experiment, but seeing that technology implemented in their patient care system.
So I'm hearing it's sort of multifaceted of sort of having that on the ground conversations with the system being based in real world services and what matters, that sort of areas of focus, and then being able to communicate that quite widely to the market, I guess. And then, as you say, that huge volume of deal flow so that you can be very curated in saying, this is exactly the sort of thing I'm looking for to solve this problem. Thanks, Homer. And we've covered so much. I love the term biobridges, and I love how you've sort of articulated your international collaborations as well as what you're doing locally. Just think about looking forwards. I mean, there's so much happening in health tech and health innovation. We've had obviously this huge wave of AI solutions, of tech-enabled care. What do you think are the big trends that we're going to be seeing over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think you're going to see healthcare at home take off. And it's everything from AI agents, and we're not talking about bots, we're talking about AI agents to guide you through processes, the use of data that's coming from wearables to encompass predictive analytics to make decisions. You have to remember that although we are within the Houston area, many of our patients come from rural settings and come into, Houston. Texas is a very big state. It can take you 12 hours from point to point, and it's just a miserable drive if you ever have to drive it. I'm not one to like driving that often. But the reality is we're seeing a lot in the use of AI, machine learning, predictive analytics. We have funding through the state, I mentioned for cancer, for dementia or brain-related diseases and care. At the end of the day, I'm predicting a lot of work happening in robotics, and you're seeing it On the commercial side, in terms of regulatory approvals and regulatory approaches, with a couple of technologies going through approval processes and changing the dynamics or the landscape that exists in terms of robotics.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting around the boundaries of what happens within a healthcare setting versus what happens at home, and what individuals do for themselves versus where they interact with healthcare professionals. So some of those trends I think will be influencing as we go, which you've touched on as well.
I think those boundaries are going to kind of mesh, to be honest with you. I, I foresee a future where everything that you're doing is generating data, and there are subtle and obvious notifications that are happening to the relevant parties that are involved with regards to your health. But you have to remember that you are a steward of your own health, and although recommendations and certain suggestions may exist, it really comes down to an educated patient and a patient that is willing to be involved in their own journey.
Thanks, Homer. I wanted to just think a little bit about what might be next for the Texas Medical Center in terms of, as a health district, what do you think the next sort of wave of evolution will be? And also what sort of advice you might have for others who are reflecting on this conversation and thinking about building similar models. What do you think the key things are you'd want them to hear?
Absolutely. So I am seeing that the Texas Medical Center is driving towards more companies spinning out of these institutions, more technologies that are homegrown. We love the fact that startups are coming and companies are coming from all over the world. But again, we want to be able to service those that are working, living within the Houston ecosystem. So we'll see more of that. The Texas Medical Center recently launched a cancer medical device accelerator, which I'm excited about. As someone that has dedicated a career to medical devices, to see one that is explicitly dedicated to cancer, which is a very prevalent problem within the world, but to see the efficacy of previous accelerators that have worked in health tech, whether that's digital health or medical devices, but squarely focused on cancer, is really exciting for me. We've also brought in executives or entrepreneurs in residence, which again speaks to putting together programs where you're bringing in these technologies from these institutions and you're having someone that has gone the distance, and just continuing to bridge the relationship that we have with academic institutions of higher learning like Rice University, University of Houston, University of St. Thomas, and these medical institutions, because those institutions of higher learning have brilliant engineers and brilliant scientists, researchers that are looking for problems so that they can potentially develop a solution. Well, I have hospital personnel, faculty, colleagues that have plenty of problems. And when I ask them for, can I help you solve one problem, they give me 5, they give me 10. Well, let's go talk to these students. Let's bring in these students. Let's have them maybe go through a biodesign process, have you observe, have them shadow the things that you're doing, come up with some of those problems, and let's see if we can create a solution. But not just create it, let's test it. Let's test it in relevant specimens, and let's see what the data says. And if it's viable, let's go spin out a company.
Exciting. Well, thank you so much, Homer. Thanks for taking time to share more about your experience. A huge amount has been happening in Texas, but also really interesting to hear about the deliberate things you've done in your innovation processes. So that vetting, that how you support and scale these great innovations, and how you keep that ongoing knowledge about what matters to your system and what you can do differently. Really exciting. I'm sure, like the audience, many people will want to come to Texas after your sales pitch on what happens in March. So hope to be able to do that at some point. But just want to say thank you so much for your time, and really, really grateful to be able to learn more about your Health Innovation District.
Thank you, Jenny. It's been a pleasure. I do hope you will take me up on that offer and visit us. My recommendation is don't come during the summer because it's too hot, even for someone that's been living in Houston the majority of my life. It's been a pleasure. I hope this has been informative. I'm excited about these innovation districts regarding healthcare because it's necessary. And they will be similar, but definitely different. You have to tailor to your own ecosystem. You have to build to what exists, and you have to entice the people that are there because they're going to be in it not for a short run, but a long run.
Thanks, Homer. Brilliant advice to land on.